The screaming never stopped. That's what Ambassador Thren would remember most about the fall of his homeworld. It's not the massive explosions or the sight of his people's greatest cities crumbling into dust, but the endless screaming that echoed. Through space itself, the Void Swarm had a way of making sure their victims stayed conscious until the very end. Feeding off their terror like some cosmic vampire, Thren's forearms shook as he gripped the command rail of his flagship, watching through the viewport as another wave of bioships descended toward the planet's surface. These weren't machines built in factories, they were living creatures the size of battleships, their hulls pulsing with veins full of stolen life force from 1,000 dead worlds. Every beat of their alien hearts meant another million of his. People were dying below. "Sir, the planetary defense grid has gone completely silent," reported his communications officer, her voice barely a whisper. The young Kelvani's skin had turned the pale blue color that meant absolute terror in their species were reading 0 energy signatures from any of our weapon platforms. Of course they were. The swarm always did this. They would land their feeding ships on populated areas and drain the life from everything within hundreds of miles. Power plants, defensive systems, even the grass and trees, everything died to fuel their endless hunger. What made it worse was how methodical they were about it. This wasn't random destruction, it was farming. "How many evacuation ships made it off-world?" Thren asked, though he already knew the answer would break what was left of his heart. 17 ships, sir. Maybe 2 million souls total? 2 million. Out of 12 billion. The math was simple and horrible. His entire civilization had been reduced to the population of a small city in the span of 6 hours. Thren closed all 4 of his eyes and tried to think. The swarm would finish with his homeworld in another day, maybe 2 at most. Then they would come for the refugee fleet. His ships were fast, but they couldn't run forever, and the swarm never gave up once they caught a scent. In 3 days, maybe. For the Kelvani would be nothing but another footnote in galactic history. Another species that had the bad luck to be in the wrong place when the hungry darkness came calling. "Send out the emergency beacon," he ordered, surprised at how calm his own voice sounded. "Maximum power. All frequencies. Offer them everything we have. Our technology databases, star charts, even our remaining worlds. S. Someone has to be willing to help." The beacon went out like a desperate prayer shot into the void. It carried with it the collected knowledge of his people, scientific discoveries that had taken centuries to achieve, cultural treasures that represented thousands of years, of art and music and the locations of every Kelvani colony in the galaxy. Everything they had built, everything they were, offered freely to anyone strong enough to save what was left of them. The responses came back quickly, and each one felt like another nail in their coffin. The Galactic Council sent their regrets, but explained they were dealing with budget constraints. Trade Federation was very sorry, but their military was committed to protecting established commercial routes. The Peaceful Alliance of Worlds offered to hold a moment of silence for the Kelvani people, which was nice but not particularly useful when facing extinction. Hours passed, or polite rejections filled their communication buffer. Some civilizations didn't even bother to respond. They just blocked the frequency entirely. Thren began to understand that his people were truly alone. In a galaxy full of advanced civilizations, billions of intelligent beings, and countless worlds, no one was willing to stand up to the swarm. Then, just as hope was finally dying, a single message arrived. Came from a small blue planet way. Out on the galactic rim, a world that most databases listed as uninhabitable. The message itself was short and direct in a way that caught Thren completely off guard. "We're coming. Hold position. Captain Jack Miller, Earth Defense Force." Earth. Thren had never heard of it, but his aide was already pulling up what little information their databases contained. What he read made his blood run cold for entirely new reasons. The planet was classified as a death world, a ball of rock. With crushing gravity, a toxic atmosphere full of oxygen, and weather patterns that could kill most galactic citizens in minutes. Somehow, impossibly, it had produced intelligent life that had achieved SPACFLIGHT. As Thren stared out at the approaching swarm fleet, he wondered what kind of monsters lived on such a world. and whether inviting them here was about to solve one problem by creating an even bigger one. The space around Thren's refugee fleet suddenly lit up like a festival as 27 ships materialized out of nowhere. But these weren't the sleek, elegant vessels that most civilized species built. These looked like they had been designed by someone who expected to get into fights and wanted to make sure they could take a beating. Thick armor plating covered every surface. Scorch marks along their hulls told stories of battles that Thrin couldn't even imagine. The lead ship was massive, easily twice the size of anything in the Kelvani fleet, and it looked like it had been through hell and back. Burns from energy weapons, dents from kinetic impacts, and what appeared to be claw marks from some enormous creature decorated its surface like badges of honor. This wasn't a ship built for exploration or trade. This was a weapon that happened to have life support systems. When the communication channel opened, Thrin got his first look at a human being, and his initial reaction was to take a step backward. Captain Jack Miller was smaller than Thrin had expected, but there was something about him that made the Kelvani's survival instincts scream warnings. The human had the kind of eyes that belonged on a predator, constantly moving, always watching, calculating distances and threat levels without conscious thought. "Ambassador Thrin, I'm Captain Miller," the human said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of politeness and barely contained aggression. "We got your message. Sorry it took us so long to get here, but we had to load up on some special supplies." Thrin tried to compose himself. These beings had come to help, after all. "Hey, Captain Miller, I cannot express how grateful we are that someone answered our call. But I must warn you, the Void Swarm has destroyed 43 star systems. They have weapons that can drain the life from entire planets, and their bioships can adapt to any attack we throw at them." "Yeah, we read the files on our way over," Miller replied with a casual shrug that made Thren's for hearts skip a beat. How could anyone be so calm when discussing galactic extinction? "My science officer, Dr. Rachel Foster, wants to get some samples of these bioships. And my tactical officer, Commander Tyler Brooks, needs detailed reports of their attack patterns from the last 6 months. A female voice interrupted from somewhere off screen. "Captain, the probe ships are moving in. Looks like they want to. Check out the new arrivals." Thrin felt his blood freeze. The swarm's probe ships were nightmarish creatures. Living vessels the size of small moons that could tear apart entire fleets. "Captain, you need to retreat immediately. Those are scout vessels, but they're still incredibly dangerous. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy your entire fleet." But instead of fear, Thrin saw something else entirely cross the human captain's face. It took him a moment to recognize it because he had never seen anyone react this way to mortal danger. Captain Miller was smiling. "Lieutenant Jenny Walsh, take us in," Miller ordered. "Let's show these bugs what Earth hospitality looks like." What happened next violated everything Thrin thought he knew about space combat. The human ships didn't use energy weapons like every other civilized species. Instead, they fired solid projectiles, chunks of metal, that moved so fast they punched clean through the bioarmor that had protected swarm vessels for millions of years. But that was just the beginning. The humans deployed chemical weapons that made the massive bioships writhe in what could only be described as agony. Thrin watched in fascination and horror as creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries began to tear at their own hulls, trying to escape whatever toxins the humans had introduced into their systems. But the most shocking moment came when one of the human ships, its hull already damaged from the fight, deliberately rammed straight into a probe vessel twice its size. The collision should have destroyed both ships, but somehow the human vessel survived while the bioship split apart like a cracked egg. Commander Brooks's voice came through the communication channel. Thrin could hear the excitement in her tone. "Target down. That's 3 confirmed kills, Captain. The remaining probes are pulling back, pulling back." The words didn't make sense at first. The Void Swarm didn't retreat. They had never retreated, not in all the centuries they had been consuming worlds. They were an unstoppable force that devoured everything in their path without fear or hesitation. But as Thrin watched through his viewport, he saw something that would have been impossible just an hour ago. The remaining swarm probe ships were actually turning around and heading back toward their main fleet. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Void Swarm had been forced to run away from a fight. Captain Miller appeared on the screen. Again, and this time his predator's grin was even wider. "Well, Ambassador, that was educational. These bugs aren't as tough as their reputation suggested. Give us a few days to study their tactics, and we'll have this problem sorted out for you." Thren stared at the human in complete bewilderment. In the span of less than an hour, these strange beings from their death world had accomplished something that the combined military might of 43 civilizations had failed to do. They had made the Void Swarm afraid. Dr. Rachel Foster had set up her laboratory in what used to be the Kelvani flagship's main cargo bay, and the transformation was both impressive and deeply unsettling. Human scientific equipment filled every corner, devices that hummed and beeped, with alien purpose, while displaying readouts that Thren's translators couldn't even begin to interpret. But what made his security team shift nervously at their posts wasn't the technology. It was the way Dr. Foster worked. She moved around chunks of swarm biomatter like they were ordinary lab specimens, instead of pieces of the galaxy's most feared predators. While she worked, she hummed strange melodies that she called classic rock, occasionally singing along to lyrics about rebellion and fighting that made Thren wonder what kind of culture could produce such music. The contrast between her cheerful demeanor and the nightmarish creatures she was dissecting made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. "This is absolutely fascinating," Dr. Foster announced to the assembled Kelvani scientists, holding up what looked like a piece of living tissue that still pulsed with its own heartbeat. "These organisms have incredible regenerative capabilities, but their immune systems are surprisingly basic. They've never had to develop sophisticated defenses because they've never encountered real biological warfare." One of Thren's lead scientists, an elderly Kelvani named Vex, raised a trembling hand. "Dr. Foster, with respect, those creatures have survived encounters with every known weapon type in the galactic database. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, even nuclear devices. How can you call their defenses primitive?" Dr. Foster's grin was the kind that probably scared her colleagues back on Earth, because they've been fighting civilized opponents. You've all been trying to kill them with clean, efficient weapons. Nobody's been nasty about it. She gestured to a table full of vials containing various colored liquids. "These are biological agents specifically designed to target their cellular structure. Not to kill them quickly, but to make them suffer while they die. There's a difference." The casual way she discussed inflicting pain on living creatures made Thren's stomachs churn, but he couldn't argue with the results. Every test sample she had treated with her biological agents had dissolved into a writhing mess within minutes. Meanwhile, Commander Tyler Brooks had taken over the tactical briefing room, filling it with holographic displays that showed swarm attack patterns from dozens of previous battles. Unlike the Kelvani military analysts who studied these recordings with growing despair, Brooks watched them with the focused attention of someone looking for weaknesses to exploit. "Here's what we're dealing with," Brooks explained, manipulating the hologram to show a typical swarm assault. Sure. They use overwhelming numbers and brute force tactics because they've never needed to be clever. Look at this formation. It's designed to intimidate peaceful species into surrendering, not to handle actual resistance. The recording showed massive bioships advancing in perfect lines, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent threats. It was a formation designed to inspire terror, and Thren had to admit it worked perfectly. Just watching the replay made his people's natural flight instincts kick in. "Now watch what happens when you don't run away," Brooks continued, switching to footage from their recent encounter. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed to violate basic tactical doctrine, weaving between swarm vessels at distances that should have resulted in mutual destruction. But instead of colliding, the humans used the close quarters to deliver devastating attacks that the bioships couldn't counter. "You fly like madmen," observed Commander Kex, Thren's own tactical officer. "Those maneuvers should be impossible. The collision risks alone." "That's the point," Brooks replied with obvious pride. "The swarm expects rational behavior. They've been fighting logical opponents who follow predictable patterns. We don't do predictable." Captain Miller joined the briefing, and Thren noticed that all the humans seemed to share the same predatory confidence. It was like being in a room full of apex predators who had just caught an interesting scent. "We've identified 17 different ways to hurt these things," Miller announced, gesturing to displays that showed weak points in swarm bioships that no one had ever noticed before. "The Queen is ancient and experienced, but she's been winning easy fights for so long that she's forgotten how to handle real opposition." Lieutenant Colonel Dave Martinez, the Marine commander, spoke up from his position near the back of the room. His voice carried the kind of casual violence that made Thren grateful these humans were on his side. "Dr. Foster's got some special surprises cooking up in her lab. We're going to teach these bugs what it feels like to be afraid." The way he cracked his knuckles while saying it sent a chill through Thren's exoskeleton. These humans weren't just planning to fight the Void Swarm. They were looking forward to it. After watching galaxy after galaxy fall to these creatures, after seeing entire civilizations consumed without hope of resistance, Thren was witnessing something unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, someone was hunting the hunters. The Void Swarm had spent millions of years being the thing that other species feared in the dark. Now they were about to learn what it felt like to be prey. And judging by the expressions on the human faces around him, Thren suspected the swarm was going to get a very thorough education in fear. When Captain Miller gave the order to attack, the human fleet moved like a pack of wolves that had been waiting far too long for their chance to hunt. The assault began exactly at what the humans called dawn, ship time, though in the black. Void of space, the only sunrise, was the brilliant flash of weapons fire that lit up 3 different swarm hive clusters. Simultaneously, Thren watched from his flagship as the humans deployed weapons that his database indicated violated 17 different galactic warfare conventions. These weren't the clean, efficient energy weapons that civilized species used. These were dirty, brutal tools designed not just to kill, but to make the dying as unpleasant as possible. Dr. Rachel Foster's viral bombs hit the first hive cluster like invisible death. The massive bioships that had regenerated from every previous attack suddenly began rotting from the inside out. Their living hulls, which had pulsed with stolen life energy for millions of years, started dissolving into pools of organic waste. The creatures that had seemed immortal were dying in ways that made Thren's translator struggle to find appropriate words, but the viral weapons were just the opening act. Commander Tyler Brooks unleashed chemical payloads that turned the swarm's greatest strength, their interconnected biology, into their worst nightmare. The same neural networks that allowed them to coordinate perfect attacks now carried waves of agony through entire fleets. Thren watched in fascination and horror as bioships began tearing at their own hulls, trying desperately to escape pain that came from within their own bodies. What happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy, though most civilized species would spend years trying to believe the reports. The humans did something that no species in recorded history had ever attempted. They boarded the swarm bioships. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Martinez led the first wave of Marines, their powered armor making them look like walking tanks as they cut their way through bioship hulls with weapons that seemed designed by someone who had given up on the concept of mercy entirely. These weren't the precise, controlled weapons of advanced civilizations. These fired chunks of radioactive metal at speeds that turned living tissue into soup. Breach successful, or inside the primary hive. The voice of Sergeant Bobby Chen crackled through the communication channels as his squad carved their way through corridors that pulsed with alien heartbeats. The bioships weren't just vessels. They were living creatures. And the Marines were fighting their way through what mounted to the bloodstream of a monster the size of a city. The sounds that followed made Thren's advanced translation systems overload trying to process them. Human battle cries mixed with swarm death screams as the Marines moved through living tunnels, deploying weapons that turned the creature's own biology against them, napalm charges that burned through regenerating tissue faster than it could heal, explosive rounds that scattered toxic metals through the bioships, circulatory systems. But it was Major Linda Thompson who provided the moment that would be remembered for centuries. Her demolition team fought their way to the primary hive mind of the largest bioship, a creature so ancient that it had been consuming worlds since before most galactic civilizations had discovered fire. As waves of swarm defenders tried desperately to protect their nerve center, Thompson planted nuclear charges with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work before. "This is for every world you consumed, you oversized parasites." She shouted over the chaos of battle, personally triggering the explosives that tore the ancient creature apart from within. The explosion that followed lit up half the solar system. But what came after was even more remarkable. For the first time in millions of years of galactic history, the Void Swarm began to retreat. Not just tactical withdrawals or regrouping maneuvers, actual, systematic retreat driven by something that their species had never experienced before. The Queen's mental commands, which had coordinated swarm attacks across countless star systems, now carried overtones that made every translator in the refugee fleet struggle to find appropriate words. The closest translation that Thren's systems could manage was terror, a concept so foreign to the swarm that they had never developed proper neural pathways for processing it. But what truly shocked the galaxy wasn't just that the humans were winning against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable, it was the way they were winning. Throughout the battle, human communication channels carried something that civilized species found almost impossible to understand: laughter. These Deathworlders weren't grimly fighting for survival or desperately defending their territory. They were enjoying themselves. The sounds of human Marines joking with each other while fighting through bioship corridors, pilots whooping with excitement as they pulled off impossible maneuvers, and officers taking bets on who could destroy the most swarm vessels, painted a picture of a species that turned warfare into entertainment. As Thren watched the remnants of 3 entire hive clusters fleeing toward deep space, it realized that the galaxy had been fundamentally wrong about the nature of the Void Swarm. They weren't unstoppable cosmic predators. They were bullies who had never learned to handle someone fighting back with equal enthusiasm for violence. And now they were learning what it felt like to be afraid. The space around the refugee fleet suddenly went dark as something impossibly massive dropped out of hyperspace. The Swarm Queen's personal bioship was beyond anything Thren had ever imagined, a living mountain of flesh and bone that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, surface covered with weapons that had harvested the life force from entire star systems. This wasn't just a ship, it was a mobile world ancient beyond measure, that had been consuming galaxies since before most civilizations had learned to count stars. When the Queen's psychic voice touched every mind in the system, Thren felt his consciousness nearly shatter under the weight of her thoughts. This creature had lived for millions of years, had watched the birth and death of countless species, and had never once needed to consider the possibility of defeat. Her mental presence carried the accumulated wisdom and cruelty of eons spent as the galaxy's ultimate predator. Small, violent creatures, her thoughts pressed against their minds like the crushing depths of an ocean. You have proven yourselves worthy opponents, says ... unprecedented. We offer you tribute beyond your comprehension. Choose any 10 star systems in this galaxy, and we will spare them from consumption. This generosity exceeds anything we have offered in a million years of conquest. The offer would have seemed impossibly generous to any other species. 10 entire star systems, billions of worlds, trillions of lives spared in exchange for accepting the inevitable destruction of everything else. It was the kind of deal that galactic councils would debate for years before accepting. Captain Miller's response came without hesitation. Broadcast on all channels with the flat certainty of someone who had never learned the meaning of compromise. Counteroffer. Pack up your entire operation and leave every inhabited system in the galaxy alone, or we finish what we started here. The Queen's psychic laughter shook asteroids throughout the system, a sound like breaking planets that made reality itself seem to vibrate. You are few, tiny creatures, perhaps a few thousand of your kind at most. We are infinite billions of bioships, trillions of warrior forms, the accumulated might of a million consumed worlds. You cannot possibly believe you can threaten us. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Martinez's voice cut through the Queen's mental noise with the casual confidence that had become humanity's signature. Lady, you obviously haven't met Americans yet. We specialize in doing impossible things just to prove they can be done, and we definitely don't know how to quit. What followed redefined everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The humans didn't just fight the Queen's personal armada. they turned the battle into a teaching moment. Kelvani refugees who had never held weapons in their lives suddenly found themselves armed with human rifles, learning to fight alongside Dr. Rachel Foster as she shouted instructions between shots. Aim for the center mass. Don't go for fancy shots. Foster yelled to Ambassador Thren as he struggled with the unfamiliar weight of a human assault rifle. These things evolved to scare herbivores into submission. They're not actually built for real combat. Thren discovered something he had never known about himself, that under the right circumstances, with the right teachers and the right motivation, even a peaceful diplomat could learn to enjoy pulling a trigger. The humans had a way of making violence seem not just necessary, but almost recreational. Their battle cries, mixed with Kelvani, were songs that hadn't been sung in centuries as the refugee fleet fought alongside their rescuers. But the real shock came when Sergeant Billy Chen led a mixed human Kelvani boarding team directly into the Queen's bioship. The idea should have been suicidal. The Queen's personal vessel was protected by defenses that had been perfected over millions of years of conquest. But the humans had taught their new allies something that the swarm had never encountered. The concept of fighting dirty. The boarding team moved through living corridors that pulsed with the Queen's heartbeat, using weapons that violated every galactic warfare convention ever written. Chemical agents that turned the bioship's own circulatory system against it. Viral bombs that made regenerating tissue collapse into toxic waste. And old-fashioned explosives that had been designed to cause maximum psychological impact. When they reached the Queen's nerve center, the ancient intelligence that had devoured countless civilizations tried one last time to assert her dominance. Her psychic scream of rage and disbelief echoed through dimensions as Chen personally placed the explosive charges that would end her reign of terror. "This is from Earth, with love," he said, triggering the detonation that tore the Queen apart. From within, the explosion sent shockwaves through biospace that every surviving swarm creature felt simultaneously. For the first time in their species' existence, they experienced the death of their eternal leader, and with her died their sense of invincibility. The remaining bioships fled into deep space, carrying with them the knowledge that they were no longer the galaxy's apex predators. As the refugee fleet began its journey back to reclaim their homeworld, Ambassador Thren found Captain Miller on his bridge, already planning patrol routes to make sure the swarm never returned to inhabited space. "Captain Miller," Thren said, his forearms spread in the Kelvani gesture of infinite gratitude, "how can we ever repay what you've done for us? You've saved not just our species, but probably countless others who would have fallen to the swarm." Miller shrugged with the casual humility that seemed to characterize his entire species. "Oh, don't worry about repaying anything, Ambassador. Just remember that when the next impossible situation comes up, Earth answers distress calls. That's what good neighbors do." Within days, the story had spread through every galactic communication network. The Deathworlders from the Rim had done the impossible. They had made the universe's ultimate predators afraid. But more than that, they had established themselves as the species you called when extinction came knocking at your door. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not as conquerors seeking to build an empire, but as the neighbors who showed up when everyone else had given up hope,